The Dark Souls series has exploded in popularity with every game, including its sister title, Bloodborne, which has gone down in history as one of the PlayStation 4's greatest exclusives. So great that the constant port begging to PC hasn't died down an inch since the day it came out. But what about their lesser-known predecessor? The PlayStation 3 exclusive that was pushed to the side by Sony themselves after Shuhei Yoshida initially called it crap, and an unbelievably bad game. Yeah, I'm talking about Demon's Souls, which, despite Sony's reluctance about it, launched in 2009 to widespread praise and financial success. It ended up spawning the Dark Souls trilogy in the wake of its sleeper hit notoriety, but it was ultimately left to fend for itself on an aging console. A predicament made worse by the fact that the PlayStation 4 has no backwards compatibility at all. As the Dark Souls trilogy approached completion, more and more people were explicitly hoping for a remaster of Demon's Souls, particularly people who loved Souls games but never had the necessary console to experience it. We were left wondering for years whether or not it would happen, whether the game that started it all was doomed to stay deserted on an outdated machine, or if it would be given a second win on newer hardware. And then, in June of this year, we received our answer. The Demon's Souls remake, with veteran remasterers and remakers, Bluepoint Games at the helm. A lot of people were very excited, and for good reason. The announced trailer evoked an amazing burst of nostalgia for old fans, and piqued the interest of people who always wanted to play, but never had the means. Plus, Bluepoint had already proven their dependability when remaking classics with 2018's Shadow of the Colossus, and it got even better from there. The remake was later confirmed to be a launch title for the PlayStation 5, a dream come true to anyone who was dreading a launch window drought for the console. And now the game is finally here. Does it live up to those lofty expectations? Let's talk about it. The most obvious and foremost thing that pretty much everyone has noticed about the game since the day the first gameplay footage was shown was how gorgeous it looks. It was widely considered to be one of the few games that truly looked next-gen, and I'm inclined to agree. There's an incredible amount of detail on display in this remake. Every level is bursting at the seams with remarkably high-quality textures, enemy models, and a ton of new environmental assets, many of which destructible, and fantastic lighting that actually isn't ray tracing as good as it may look. Simply put, Demon's Souls is an awe-striking way to start the generation and shows just how much fidelity the PlayStation 5 can boast. It makes me wonder how games will look 3 years from now when developers truly know how to optimize the game for the hardware. Additionally, players are given the choice between performance mode and cinematic mode. The latter keeps the game looking as good as possible at all times at 4K, maintaining a rock-solid 30 frames per second to achieve this. The former is optimized for 60 frames per second and adopts dynamic resolution which dips and rises between 1440p and 4K whenever necessary. The incredible thing here isn't the fact that this choice exists, it's the fact that the game sacrifices very little graphical quality to achieve 60 frames per second in performance mode. The difference between the two might be noticeable if you squint hard enough, but once the action starts and you're simply focused on surviving, it's pretty indistinct. There's also incredible new animations made from motion capturing. Apparently every single thing your character and enemies do are a result of it, and it shows. The way you and your foes move looks smoother than ever before. While the graphical fidelity of the game is impressive, the slick new animations might be more so, depending on who you ask. Bluepoint also decided to offer up a fair share of visual filters, just like they did with their Shadow of the Colossus remake. And side note, I would like to point out that in my predictions video about this game, I guessed that they would do this. Anyway, the variety of filters change several aspects of the game's picture, including brightness, contrast, saturation, and overall color temperature. There's also a classic filter that makes areas look just as they do in the original game. Personally, I kept the game's filter setting to default on my first playthrough so I could take in Bluepoint's own stylistic choices, and then switched between a few afterward. But if you want to play a bit with the other options, you're free to change the setting whenever you desire. And the detail doesn't just stop at the visuals. The new sound effects are amazing too. Whenever you slice something with your sword, or cast a spell, or knock down a ladder or a bridge, or destroy random items in the environment, or hear rocks falling from overhead, you hear some extremely high quality audio that adds a whole new level of tangibility to the gameplay. You can easily gauge where the sound is coming from and how far away it is. In fact, some areas turn into a whole new experience when you slap some good headphones on, especially stages with huge monsters, like Boletaria and its dragons or the Storm King fight. I seriously recommend giving it a shot. If you've played any Souls game or Bloodborne before, you likely don't need me to tell you how great the level design is. But for those not in the know, this franchise has a reputation for many things: difficulty, atmosphere, minimalist storytelling, and clever level design is among them. In terms of both layout and artistry, Demon's Souls boasts some of the most complex but also memorable areas in the series, while also keeping them fairly punctuated, running little risk of tiring you out with the same looking environments for hours on end. Boletaria is a massive fortified city that feels huge even if you're ultimately only experiencing a small portion of it. Stonefang Tunnel and Tower of Latria are expert displays of verticality in level design, with the latter being widely considered as one of the best areas From Software ever created, with its awe-striking visuals combined with its almost labyrinthine layout. Shrine of Storms has an amazing atmosphere, staying true to its name with a constant overcast sky. Valley of Defilement is the proto-Blight Town, and is an absolute disgusting shit-covered hellhole that is oppressive to the senses as much as it is to one's patience. The worlds in this remake are as great as ever, and give it a new breath of life thanks to the fresh coat of paint. Related to the topic of visuals and sound is art style and music, and this is where things get a bit touchy. In the few days leading up to the game's release, early footage sparked some division among the fanbase for seemingly unnecessary changes to enemy designs, the user interface, and the musical score. A vocal handful of people expressed deep disappointment over such changes. I can understand being let down by such creative choices, as Demon's Souls is a game that got by just as much on its atmosphere and artistic stylization as it did on its gameplay. However, while I was actually playing and getting into the action, these creative liberties went almost entirely unnoticed to me. Frankly, I had little interest in splitting my attention between closely examining every enemy model and dissecting every note of the musical score while also trying to stay alive. But that's not to say I personally approve of some design changes, such as Satsuki's, who looks more like an Asian stereotype than he ever did in the original game, but it was about as distracting as a speck of dust flying across my field of vision for 2 seconds, because Satsuki was on my screen and alive for about as long. Then there's the user interface, which got some complaints about being too neat and clean. Sterile, if you will. This is a bit more understandable, as these Souls games have always had their tone and style come across even through the tiny visual details in menus and the HUD. However, again, these visual changes are ultimately just that, visual. These menus still serve the same purpose they always have. I've seen some individuals go so far as to claim that these stylistic alterations are emblematic of the game being gentrified for a wider audience. But honestly, that just comes off as purist alarmism to me, especially since the actual gameplay is more or less completely unchanged and just as authentic as ever, minus tiny modifications like certain item drop rates being increased or omnidirectional rolling when locked on. There's no easy mode or anything like that that would actually interfere with the game's legacy. Aesthetic changes to things like enemy designs and the UI are the most benign type of change this game could have gotten. It's still a challenging experience with a heavy oppressive atmosphere, one that you can change now thanks to filter options, and intensely gratifying combat that rewards patience and punishes panicking. In terms of optional features, however, this is where things get interesting. This remake features a brand new Fractured mode, which is a simple mirroring of the game's picture, a horizontal flip that changes directions of stages. This might sound pretty simple, to the point where you might even wonder what it could actually change, and the answer is quite a lot. Fractured mode is downright disorienting, especially if you've played through the game multiple times before activating it. And it's not just the stages that are flipped, enemy models and the placement of the camera behind your character is too. And since it's purely visual, your character's right hand is still their right hand, even though it appears to be their left on screen. It's weird. It may just be me, but the moment I turned the mode on after nearly 30 hours of playing normally, I immediately felt uncomfortable. It's crazy how different a simple visual flip can change things. There's also the photo mode, which is steadily becoming more and more of a standard feature in games that have a strong focus on looking good, and it's just as intuitive here as it is in any other game. Funnily enough, it's also the only way to truly pause the game when you're not online. There's a lot of options to explore in this photo mode, but the most intriguing is setting your own filter. You can pick among the preset ones I mentioned earlier and modify them further, but what's particularly amazing about how Demon's Souls does it is that you can choose to have this custom filter persist in gameplay, so the game can continue to look like your picture. Pretty awesome. At the end of the day, this game is still the Demon's Souls experience that came out back in 2009, for better and for worse. One of Demon's Souls' biggest strengths is the ability to make precise builds and map out ways to go from world to world and grab necessary items and equipment to fully realize your build as soon as possible. This is a huge plus to having a game that has different branching paths from the get-go. A caveat to this is that Demon's Souls also has a pretty damn modest number of weapons, rings, and spells compared to later Souls games. But they're also very different from one another, so when you decide on a build, you shouldn't expect much wiggle room in terms of weapons you'll be using. In fact, it's pretty customary to meticulously plan a build around a specific weapon anyway, and stick with it extremely closely. Partially because soul levels become very expensive very quickly, and partially because collecting upgrade materials is more of a pain in the ass here than in the Dark Souls trilogy. And this is where the questionable creative liberties really start to poke their heads. There are some gameplay aspects that are actually worth complaining about over simple visual changes. Bluepoint took it upon themselves to do things like change enemy designs, make pure Bladestone easier to get, and add fractured mode and a photo mode that actually pauses the game. But they didn't think to at least give us the option to respec our characters, a feature that would be added to later Souls games, and would seem like a no-brainer to add here, because one of the most dated aspects of Demon's Souls is not being able to undo soul level allocation when you decide to change your mind on a build. So not only are you encouraged to stay rigid in your build planning, you're also obligated to stick with it even if you decide you don't like it, because there's no way to respec. Unless, of course, you want to enter PvP with a friend who can use Soul Suck on you for a few hours, or invade randoms and chuck yourself off a cliff over and over. If you want to change your character's build partway into the game, your only choices are weird, tedious workarounds, or create a new character and play the game again. Oh, and for some reason, as of recording this review, you cannot delete individual characters from your save file either. So even if you do abandon one character for another, the one you left behind will collect dust in your save, because if you want to delete them, you have to delete everything. Then there's grass. One of the most busted aspects of Demon's Souls was the lack of a hard limit on healing grasses you could carry, so anyone could lug around 99 of each and basically never die. Bluepoint attempted to address this by not only putting a hard limit on each, but making the more potent grasses significantly heavier. This unfortunately butts heads with the already annoying item burden mechanic that limits the amount of items you can carry, because once you reach a certain amount of vitality, you'll want to carry around stronger grasses, but they weigh a ton, and will probably stop you from picking up armor and weapons out in the world, so if you're the type who likes to mix and match equipment as soon as you pick it up, you'll still be forced to go back to the Nexus to do it. You can send things to storage whenever you'd like, which is a partial solution to this problem, and much better than nothing, because the original game forced you to discard something from your inventory or lose the loot forever. But why even keep item burden at all if this is the case? It was widely considered a mechanic worth disposing of after the remake was announced, and a poor attempt to balance grass usage actually made it even worse to deal with in some cases. Gender-locked armor still exists too, and you can change your character's gender back in the Nexus to fit a piece of armor if you so desire. But, just like the lack of respecking and the return of item burden, why not just remove the limitation entirely instead of settling for a lame workaround that just adds an unnecessary and tedious extra step that ultimately still gets the same result? It's laughably inefficient. Basically, while Bluepoint's insistence on staying true to the experience of the original game mechanics-wise is admirable and ultimately the smart move, a little bit more flexibility could have gone a long way. There were plenty of opportunities to make some welcome changes, but unfortunately they've gone unrealized thanks to Bluepoint's firm rigidity, in spite of them still adding their own mechanics and changing the designs of certain enemies. It's not so much of a big deal that these annoying workarounds actively detract from the overall experience, but enough to be frustrating every once in a while, particularly when you need to do them out of necessity for whatever reason. But don't let things like that deter you from this otherwise stellar remake. It's still a Souls game at heart and a damn good one. It's still extremely fun and replayable, but now with the added bonus of being drop-dead gorgeous to look at. The atmosphere is still strong and moody, the level design is still top-notch, the bosses are still epic, and the challenge is still at the forefront. It's a fantastic game and a fantastic launch title. It's just a bit of a shame that Bluepoint didn't get bold where it actually counted. I love the game more or less the same amount that I do the original, and it continues to be my overall favorite Souls game. And since it's a remake of the game that started it all, it's also a great point of entry for those who haven't touched the franchise before. This concludes my review of Demon's Souls. As a remake, it's both amazing and a bit of a missed opportunity in some small areas, but overall it's still an outstanding time. I look forward to whatever else Bluepoint has up their sleeve. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.